The war had ended 8 months ago, but Emperor Veskhar still tasted ash in his mouth every morning. Not the literal ash of burned worlds, though there had been plenty of that during the siege of the Outer Rim. This was something deeper, something that clung to the back of his throat like a parasite he could not extract. His physicians assured him it was psychosomatic, a phantom sensation born of stress and sleep deprivation. Veskhar did not believe them, but he also did not have time to argue. Rebuilding an empire was not a task for the faint of heart or the well-rested. He stood in the observation deck of the Imperial Dreadnought Sovereign Will, watching the construction drones swarm around the skeletal frame of what would become the new orbital defense platform above Cathar Prime. The homeworld glittered below him, a jewel of violet oceans and golden continents, unscarred by the war that had ravaged the outer territories. That had been intentional. Veskhar had thrown everything he had into the front lines, spending ships and soldiers like currency to ensure that no enemy vessel came within a parsec of Cathar Prime. The strategy had worked, but the cost had been astronomical. 3 entire fleets reduced to debris, 7 colonial worlds rendered uninhabitable, millions of Catharan warriors dead, their names inscribed in the memorial obelisks that now dominated the capital city. And for what? A peace treaty that felt more like a temporary ceasefire. The Zrathi Collective had sued for peace, not because they were defeated, but because they had grown bored. That was how the insectoid hive mind operated. They would press an advantage until resistance became tedious, then withdraw to digest their gains before striking again in a century or two. Veskhar had bought his empire time, nothing more. His descendants would fight this war again and again until one side or the other achieved total annihilation. If he had descendants. The thought came unbidden, as it often did in moments of quiet reflection. Veskhar was 417 years old, which for a Catharan of noble blood meant he was in the prime of his life. He could expect another 6 centuries before age began to slow him down. But 6 centuries meant nothing if there was no heir to inherit the throne. The Imperial Council had been pressuring him for decades to choose a mate from among the noble houses to produce an heir and secure the succession. Veskhar had ignored them. He had been too busy conquering, too busy consolidating power, too busy fighting wars. There had never been time for the elaborate courtship rituals that Catharan tradition demanded. There had never been anyone who interested him enough to bother. The communicator on his wrist chimed, interrupting his thoughts. Veskhar glanced at it with irritation. His personal frequency was restricted to only the highest priority contacts, the Imperial Council. His military commanders, the Intelligence Directorate, no one else had access, and no one would dare use it frivolously. The identifier tag made him frown. It was not a Catharan frequency. It was a human one, originating from Earth of all places. Veskhar stared at it for a long moment, wondering if this was some kind of prank. The humans had been auxiliary allies during the war, providing translation services and logistical support in exchange for protection and trade concessions. They were clever little creatures, adaptable and resourceful in ways that compensated for their physical weakness. But they were also beneath notice in the grand hierarchy of the galaxy. A human contacting him directly on his personal frequency was not just unusual, it was impossible. Veskhar almost rejected the call out of sheer principle, but curiosity got the better of him. He activated the communicator and waited. The holographic display flickered to life, resolving into the image of a human female. She was young by human standards, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy knot and shadows under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion. She wore a faded gray shirt that had seen better days, and behind her, Veskhar could see the cramped interior of what appeared to be a low-income residential unit. The walls were stained and cracked, the lighting dim and inadequate. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. The woman looked directly at him, and Veskhar felt something flicker in the back of his mind. Recognition, maybe? Or the ghost of it. "I need credits," she said without preamble. Her voice was flat, drained of emotion. "Not for me. For the hatchling." Veskhar blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Hatchling was a Catharan term, not a human one. Humans called their offspring children or babies or a dozen other ridiculous diminutives. They did not use hatchling. That word was reserved for the newly emerged young of reptilian or avian species, for Catharans. "I believe you have contacted the wrong frequency," Veskhar said, his tone cold and dismissive. "I do not know you, human, and I have no hatchlings." The woman's expression did not change. She reached off screen and lifted something into view. A bundle of fabric, cradled carefully in her arms. She pulled back the edge of the blanket, and Veskhar's heart stopped. The infant was small, impossibly small by Catharan standards, but there was no mistaking what it was. Scales covered its skin, fine and delicate, gleaming with an opalescent sheen that caught the dim light. They were golden, the color of the imperial bloodline, marked with faint violet patterns that had not yet fully developed. The child's eyes were closed, but Veskhar could see the shape of the brow ridges, the slight protrusion of what would eventually become cranial crests. And when the infant shifted in its sleep, he caught a glimpse of tiny claws on its fingers. Hybrid. The word formed in his mind like a curse. Catharan and human. An abomination by the standards of his people. A genetic impossibility that should not exist. But it did exist. And as Veskhar stared at the image, memory crashed over him like a tidal wave. Andromeda Station. 8 months ago. No, closer to 17 months now. The siege had been brutal, a grinding attrition battle that lasted weeks. The Zrathi had surrounded the station, cutting off supply lines and hammering the shields with relentless bombardment. Veskhar had been on the command deck for 72 hours straight, directing the defense, coordinating counterattacks, holding the line through sheer force of will. When the enemy finally withdrew, leaving the station battered but intact, he had been too exhausted to even stand. Someone had helped him to his quarters, a human, one of the translators assigned to his staff. He remembered her voice, calm and steady, guiding him through the corridors when his vision swam with fatigue. He remembered collapsing on his bunk, remembered her bringing him water, remembered her staying when he asked her not to leave. He did not remember her name. He did not remember much of what happened after that. The details were hazy, obscured by exhaustion and the combat stimulants that had been keeping him functional. But he remembered skin against scales, warmth in the cold sterility of his quarters, a desperate coupling born of proximity and survival instinct, and the overwhelming need to feel something other than the weight of command. It had meant nothing. A moment of weakness, a biological release, a brief escape from the crushing responsibility of keeping millions of people alive. He had dismissed her the next morning with barely a word, his mind already returning to tactical assessments and damage reports. He had never thought of her again. Until now. "Her name is Lyra," the human woman said, pulling the blanket back over the infant. "She is 4 months old. She needs specialized formula because human milk does not provide the nutrients her Catharan physiology requires. That formula costs 600 credits per week. I work 3 jobs and I still cannot afford it. I have been diluting it with water to make it last, but she is losing weight. The doctor says if I do not get the proper formula, she will develop bone malformations. Permanent ones." Veskhar's mind raced, calculating implications and consequences with the speed of a battle computer. If this was true, if this child was indeed his offspring, then the political ramifications were catastrophic. The Catharan Empire had strict laws regarding genetic purity. Interbreeding with other species was not technically illegal, but it was deeply taboo, considered a defilement of the bloodline. For a commoner, it would result in social ostracism. For a member of the nobility, it would mean loss of title and land. For the emperor, it could mean civil war. There were factions within the imperial council that already opposed his rule. Nobles who resented his consolidation of power, military commanders who questioned his strategies. If they learned that he had produced a hybrid heir, they would use it as a weapon. They would claim he had betrayed Catharan values, that he had sullied the imperial bloodline, that he was unfit to rule. Some would call for his abdication, others would call for his execution. And the child, this innocent hatchling who had done nothing wrong except exist, would be the focal point of their hatred. The logical choice was obvious. Deny everything. reject the claim. The woman had no proof beyond the child's appearance, and genetic testing could be falsified or suppressed. He could have her silenced, her and the child both, erased from existence as if they had never been. It would be easy. It would be clean. It would be the smart political move. Veskhar looked at the image of the sleeping infant, at the golden scales that marked her as his blood, and felt something crack inside his chest. "How did you get this frequency?" he asked quietly. The woman, Maya, he remembered now, her name was Maya Chen, met his gaze without flinching. "You gave it to me. On Andromeda Station. You said if I ever needed anything I should contact you directly. You said you owed me a debt for staying with you that night." He did not remember saying that, but it sounded like something he might have said in a moment of post-coital sentimentality. Veskhar did not make promises lightly, but when he did, he kept them. It was a matter of honor. "I will transfer the credits," he said, "for the formula, and for other expenses, medical care, housing, whatever the hatchling needs." Maya's expression flickered, something that might have been relief or might have been disappointment. "Just credits? That is all?" "What else do you want?" Veskhar asked, genuinely confused. "You contacted me for financial support. I am providing it." "I contacted you because she is your daughter," Maya said, and now there was heat in her voice, anger breaking through the exhaustion. "I contacted you because I thought you should know she exists. I thought maybe you would want to meet her, to know her. But I guess I was stupid to expect anything more from someone who cannot even remember my name." Veskhar felt his spines rise along his neck, an instinctive threat display. "I have an empire to run, human. I do not have time for sentiment. I will provide for the hatchling's material needs, but do not expect more than that. I cannot acknowledge her publicly. It would put both of you in danger." "So we just hide?" Maya demanded. "We just pretend she does not exist? What happens when she grows up and wants to know who her father is? What happens when the other kids ask why she has scales and claws and no one else does? What am I supposed to tell her?" "Tell her whatever you like," Veskhar said coldly. "Tell her I am dead. Tell her I was a soldier who died in the war. It would be kinder than the truth." "And what is the truth?" "That her father is a coward who values his throne more than his own blood." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere he did not recognize. Veskhar closed his eyes, forcing down the sudden surge of self-loathing. When he opened them again, Maya was staring at him with an expression he could not read. "I will send the credits," he said quietly. 20,000 to start. It should be enough for several months of formula and medical expenses. I will arrange for more to be transferred on a regular schedule. But Maya, you must tell no one about this. No one can know the hatchling is mine. If the wrong people find out, they will come for her. They will come for both of you. Do you understand?" Maya nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good." Veskhar reached to terminate the connection, then hesitated. "The hatchling, Lyra. Is she healthy? Apart from the formula issue?" "She is perfect," Maya said softly. "She has your eyes. Did you know that? When she opens them, they are violet. Just like yours." Veskhar said nothing. He ended the call and stood in the empty observation deck, staring at the reconstruction drones as they welded steel and circuitry into the skeleton of a defense platform that would protect his homeworld from the next war. He had spent 8 months trying to forget Andromeda Station, trying to bury the memory of that night under layers of duty and responsibility. He had almost succeeded. Now he would never forget. Because somewhere on Earth, in a cramped apartment in a bad neighborhood, a hatchling with golden scales and violet eyes slept in her mother's arms, and she was his daughter. The war, Veskhar realized, was far from over. It was just beginning. The Imperial Council convened 3 days after the call, and Veskhar knew immediately that something was wrong. The chamber was a vast circular space hewn from black marble, its walls inscribed with the names of every emperor who had ruled since the founding of the dynasty 7,000 years ago. Veskhar's own name would join them someday, carved in flowing script alongside his accomplishments and failures. He wondered sometimes what his epitaph would say. Veskhar the Conqueror. Veskhar the Rebuilder. Veskhar the Last, if the wrong people had their way. 12 chairs ringed the council table, each occupied by the head of one of the great noble houses. They represented the pillars of Catharan society, bloodlines so ancient that their genealogies predated written history. Technically, they were advisors, their role ceremonial and consultative. In practice, they wielded enormous power, controlling the military, the economy, the infrastructure of the empire. An emperor could rule without their support, but not for long, and not without constant resistance. High Chancellor Drakov sat directly across from Veskhar, his crimson robes immaculate, his silver crest gleaming in the light of the hovering illumination spheres. He was old even by Catharan standards, nearly 800 years, and his scales had faded to a dull gray that spoke of decades spent in climate-controlled palaces rather than the harsh environments that kept younger Catharans vital. But his mind was sharp as ever, and his eyes held a calculating intelligence that made him dangerous. "Your Radiance," Drakov began, his voice smooth and formal. "The Council is pleased to see you have returned your attention to domestic matters. The war occupied much of your focus, understandably so, but now that peace has been achieved, there are pressing issues that require your attention." Veskhar inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the statement without committing to anything. He had learned long ago that every word spoken in this chamber was a potential weapon. "Speak, Chancellor. What issues concern the Council?" Drakov gestured to the woman seated at his right, Lady Zareth of House Mandor. She was younger than most of the council members, barely 300, but she had inherited her position after her father died in the war. She wore the deep blue of her house, and her scales carried the distinctive silver striations that marked Mandor blood. She was ambitious, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. Veskhar had considered her as a potential mate once, before dismissing the idea. Marrying Zareth would have strengthened his political position, but it would also have given House Mandor too much influence over the throne. "Your Radiance," Zareth said, rising from her seat. "The Council wishes to address the matter of succession. You have ruled for 143 years without producing an heir. This creates instability. The noble houses grow restless. They wonder who will inherit the throne when you eventually pass. They wonder if the empire will descend into civil war over the succession, as it has in the past." Veskhar kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. This was not a new topic. The council had raised it before, many times, always with the same thinly veiled threats. But the timing now felt deliberate, coming so soon after Maya's call. Could they know? No. Impossible. He had been careful. The communication had been encrypted, the financial transfer routed through anonymous accounts. There was no way anyone could have traced it back to him, unless someone had been watching. "I am aware of the Council's concerns," Veskhar said carefully, "and I assure you, the matter of succession is under consideration. However, choosing a mate is not a decision to be made lightly. The bloodline must be preserved, yes, but it must also be strengthened. I will not rush into a union simply to satisfy political expediency." Drakov leaned forward, his claws clicking softly against the marble table. "Of course, Your Radiance. No one suggests you should compromise on the quality of your mate. However, perhaps the Council could assist in this matter. We could arrange meetings with suitable candidates from the noble houses. Carefully vetted individuals whose lineage and temperament would complement your own. Lady Zareth herself has expressed interest in such a union, as have several others." Veskhar's eyes flicked to Zareth, who met his gaze with cool confidence. Of course she had. This was a power play, an attempt by the council to force his hand. If he married Zareth or one of the other council-appointed candidates, he would be creating a political alliance that would limit his own authority. The council would gain leverage over him through his mate, influence over his heir. He would become a puppet emperor, ruling in name only while the noble houses made the real decisions. "I appreciate the council's offer," Veskhar said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "But I will choose my own mate, in my own time." This meeting is concluded. He rose from his seat, intending to leave before the conversation could continue, but Drakov's next words froze him in place. There is one other matter, Your Radiance. A matter of some delicacy. Veskhar turned slowly, his heart suddenly pounding. Drakov's expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that set off every alarm in Veskhar's mind. Speak. The Chancellor stood, his movements deliberate and measured. It has come to the Council's attention that certain financial irregularities have occurred within the Imperial accounts. A transfer of 20,000 credits to an Earth-based account routed through several anonymous intermediaries. The transaction was flagged by our security systems as unusual, given the amount and the destination. Earth is not a world where Imperial funds are typically sent, particularly not in such large sums. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Veskhar, watching for his reaction. He felt his spines begin to rise, forced them flat through sheer will. His face remained impassive, giving nothing away. The transfer you mentioned was a personal expense, not a matter for council oversight. Drakov tilted his head slightly. Of course, Your Radiance. The Imperial Treasury is yours to use as you see fit. However, given the current political climate, the council felt it prudent to inquire. There are those who might misinterpret such a transaction, who might see it as evidence of improper dealings with an inferior species. You understand our concern, surely. Veskhar understood perfectly. They knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not about Maya or Lyra specifically, but they knew something was happening. They had been monitoring his accounts, watching for any sign of weakness or scandal, and now they were testing him, pushing to see how he would react. The transfer was for the purchase of human cultural artifacts, Veskhar said smoothly. Items of historical interest related to their participation in the war. I am considering establishing a museum wing dedicated to auxiliary species who served the Empire. Is the Council opposed to honoring our allies? It was a good lie, plausible and difficult to disprove. Drakov's expression flickered just for a moment, and Veskhar knew he had bought himself time. Not much, but enough. Of course not, Your Radiance, Drakov said. The Council applauds your dedication to historical preservation. We simply wish to ensure there were no, shall we say, personal entanglements that might complicate matters. You understand that any relationship with a human, particularly one of a romantic or procreative nature, would be deeply problematic for the Empire. There was no mistaking the threat now. They suspected, even if they could not prove it, and they were warning him that if he continued down this path, there would be consequences. I have no personal entanglements, Veskhar said coldly, and I find the Council's insinuations insulting. Are we finished here? Drakov bowed, the gesture just short of mocking. Of course, Your Radiance. The Council simply wishes to protect your interests and the interests of the Empire. We live in dangerous times. Enemies surround us, both without and within. It would be tragic if the Imperial bloodline were to be compromised by something as foolish as sentiment. Veskhar left the chamber without another word, his mind churning. The Council was moving against him, not openly, not yet, but they were laying groundwork, building a case. If they discovered the truth about Lyra, they would use it to destroy him. He needed to be more careful, more strategic. He needed to protect Maya and the Hatchling without revealing their connection to him. But how? He could not acknowledge Lyra publicly. He could not bring her to Cathar Prime or integrate her into Imperial society. The law was absolute. Hybrids were not permitted citizenship. They were considered aberrations, genetic mistakes that threatened the purity of the race. Even if Veskhar changed the law, even if he somehow convinced the Council to accept a hybrid heir, the population would never follow. There would be riots, possibly rebellion. The Empire would tear itself apart. He returned to his private quarters and activated the secure communication system. It took several minutes to establish the connection, routing through the same anonymous channels he had used before. When Maya's face appeared on the holographic display, she looked worse than she had 3 days ago. The shadows under her eyes were darker, her skin paler. She was holding Lyra against her chest, the infant swaddled in the same worn blanket. Did you send the credits? Maya asked without preamble. Yes, Veskhar said. You should have received them yesterday. I did. Thank you. Maya's voice was flat, emotionless. I bought the formula. Lyra is eating better now. The doctor says she should start gaining weight within a week. Good. Veskhar hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Maya, I need to ask you something. Have you told anyone about Lyra's father? Anyone at all? No, Maya said. I told you I would not. Why? My counsel is asking questions. They flagged the credit transfer. They do not know about you or the hatchling, but they suspect something. I need you to be careful. If anyone approaches you, anyone claiming to represent the Imperial government or the Catharan embassy, do not speak to them. Do not answer their questions. Contact me immediately. Maya's expression hardened. You think they would hurt us? It was not a question. Veskhar met her gaze, seeing the fear beneath her exhaustion. I think they would do whatever they believe is necessary to protect the Empire. And right now, a hybrid hatchling with Imperial blood is a threat. Not because of anything you or Lyra have done, but because of what you represent. A scandal, a weakness, a tool that could be used against me. So what do we do? Maya asked. Do we run? Hide? I have 3 jobs, Veskhar. I barely make enough to cover rent and food. I cannot just disappear. You will not have to, Veskhar said. I am arranging something. It will take time, but I will find a way to protect you both. In the meantime, keep doing what you are doing. Go to work. Take care of the hatchling. Act as if nothing has changed. Easy for you to say, Maya muttered. You are not the one living in a one-room apartment trying to raise an alien baby on minimum wage. Veskhar felt a flicker of anger, quickly suppressed. I am aware of the difficulties you face. That is why I sent the credits. If you need more, tell me. I will provide whatever is necessary. I do not need your money, Maya said, her voice rising. I need you to be a father. I need you to acknowledge your daughter. I need you to give a damn about her beyond just sending credits to keep us quiet. The accusation stung because it was true. Veskhar looked at the image of Lyra, sleeping peacefully against her mother's chest, oblivious to the political machinations that swirled around her existence. She was so small, so fragile. Her scales had not yet hardened into proper armor. Her claws were soft and blunt. She would not survive a single day in the harsh Catharan wilderness where Imperial hatchlings were traditionally tested. And yet she was his blood, his daughter, the only heir he would ever have. He had spent his entire life building an empire, securing power, ensuring that his dynasty would endure. But what was the point of any of it if he had no one to pass it on to? What was the point of ruling if he was too afraid to protect his own child? I will come to Earth, Veskhar said quietly. Not now. Not while the council is watching. But soon. I will meet her. I will try to be what she needs. Maya's expression softened, just a little. That is all I am asking. Veskhar ended the call and sat in the darkness of his quarters, staring at nothing. He had made empires bow. He had won wars. He had faced death 1,000 times without flinching. But the thought of meeting his own daughter terrified him in a way that no battle ever had, because this was not a problem he could solve with strategy or violence. This was something that required qualities he was not sure he possessed: compassion, vulnerability, love. And if he failed, the consequences would not be measured in lost battles or fallen empires. They would be measured in the life of a hatchling who deserved better than a father who was too much of a coward to claim her. Veskhar stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, a small blue world where his daughter slept, unaware that her father was an emperor, unaware that her very existence could spark a civil war, unaware that the man who gave her life was trying to figure out how to keep her alive. The war was far from over, and this time, Veskhar was not sure he could win. Veskhar arrived on Earth 6 weeks later, under cover of a diplomatic inspection tour. The official story was that he was reviewing the human auxiliary facilities that had supported Catharan forces during the war, assessing their potential for future cooperation. It was a plausible excuse, the kind of tedious bureaucratic exercise that no one would question too closely. The truth was that he had spent those 6 weeks planning his escape from Imperial surveillance, coordinating with trusted operatives, and arranging transportation that could not be traced back to him personally. The shuttle touched down at a private spaceport outside the megacity sprawl where Maya lived. Veskhar had chosen the location carefully, far enough from the diplomatic quarter to avoid official observers, but close enough that he could reach Maya's apartment within an hour. He wore civilian clothing, a hooded cloak that concealed his cranial crests and most of his scales. It would not hold up under close inspection, but it would suffice for moving through human crowds who were too busy with their own lives to pay much attention to another pedestrian. His security detail wanted to accompany him. Veskhar refused. He traveled alone, carrying nothing but a small bag containing gifts he had carefully selected. Catharan tradition dictated that a father meeting his hatchling for the first time should bring tokens of acknowledgement. Food from the father's homeland. Cloth woven from fibers native to his territory. A weapon, symbolizing the father's commitment to teach the hatchling how to defend itself. Veskhar had adapted the tradition as best he could. Preserved fruit from the imperial orchards. A blanket made from Catharan spider silk, soft enough for an infant's delicate skin. And a small blade, no longer than his smallest claw, with a handle carved from bone and inscribed with his family crest. The last item had taken considerable effort to commission without raising questions. Veskhar had told the craftsman it was a ceremonial gift for a distant relative. The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. Everything about this situation was necessary and bitter. The journey through the city was disorienting. Veskhar had visited Earth before, of course, during the war and on previous diplomatic missions. But those visits had been carefully orchestrated affairs, moving from secured landing zones to protected facilities with minimal exposure to the general population. This was different. This was raw and unfiltered, the reality of human civilization stripped of diplomatic polish. The streets were crowded, choked with pedestrians and ground vehicles that moved in chaotic patterns that seemed to follow no logical system. Buildings rose around him in haphazard clusters, some gleaming with new construction, others crumbling with neglect. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and cooking food and something else, something organic and slightly sour that Veskhar eventually identified as humans themselves. They were everywhere, pressed together in densities that would have caused riots on Cathar Prime, and yet they seemed comfortable with it. They pushed past each other without acknowledgement, eyes fixed on personal devices or the middle distance, existing in a state of communal isolation that Veskhar found deeply unsettling. He navigated by the coordinates Maya had provided, following the mapping system on his personal communicator. The neighborhood deteriorated as he walked, the buildings growing shabbier, the streets narrower and darker. Trash accumulated in corners. Windows were barred or broken. The humans here moved differently, with a wariness that spoke of constant vigilance. This was not a safe place. This was where people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. Maya lived on the 4th floor of a residential tower that had probably been considered modern 50 years ago. Now it was just tired, the exterior concrete stained and cracked, the elevator perpetually broken according to the handwritten sign taped to its doors. Veskhar climbed the stairs, his claws clicking softly against the worn steps. The hallway smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. Somewhere a baby was crying. Not Lyra, some other infant, its wails echoing through thin walls. He found the apartment and stood outside the door for a long moment, suddenly unsure. What was he supposed to say? What was he supposed to do? He had commanded armies, negotiated treaties, sentenced criminals to death. But he had never been a father. He had no idea how to be one. Before he could second-guess himself further, the door opened. Maya stood there, looking simultaneously relieved and exhausted. She had lost weight since their last communication, her face thinner, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. But her eyes were sharp, assessing him with the kind of careful evaluation that came from living in a place where trust was a luxury. "You came," she said simply. "I said I would." Veskhar stepped inside, and Maya closed the door behind him, engaging 3 separate locks. The apartment was exactly as small as he had imagined from the background of their video calls. One room serving as bedroom, living area, and kitchen combined. A tiny bathroom visible through a partially open door. A window with a view of the alley behind the building, the glass so dirty it barely let in light. But it was clean, obsessively so. Every surface scrubbed, every item organized with military precision. Maya had made the space work through sheer determination. "She is sleeping," Maya said, gesturing to a makeshift crib in the corner. It was constructed from a plastic storage container lined with blankets, elevated on crates to keep it off the floor. Veskhar approached slowly, aware that his hearts were beating faster than they should. Lyra lay on her back, arms stretched above her head in the universal posture of sleeping infants. She had grown since the first image Maya had sent him. Her scales were more defined now, the golden color deepening into something richer, more lustrous. The violet patterns along her limbs had developed into intricate whorls that resembled Veskhar's own markings. Her cranial crests were beginning to form, small ridges pushing up through the softer scales on her head. She looked more Catharan than he had expected, and yet there was something undeniably human in her features. The shape of her face, the curve of her ears, the way her tiny fingers curled into fists. "She is beautiful," Veskhar said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "She is yours," Maya replied. "There is no question about that. Look at her scales. Look at her eyes when she opens them. She is all you." "Not all," Veskhar said quietly. "She has your determination. I can see it in the way she breathes, like she is fighting even in her sleep." "She has to fight," Maya said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "Do you know what it is like, raising her here? Do you know how many people stare when I take her outside? How many ask questions I cannot answer? Last week, someone called Child Protective Services claimed I had done something to my baby to make her look like that. I had to convince a social worker that Lyra was born this way, that she is healthy, that I am not abusing her. Do you know how humiliating that was?" Veskhar turned to face her, seeing the anger and frustration that had been building beneath her exhaustion. "I am sorry. I did not think about what this would be like for you." "No," Maya said. "You did not. You thought sending money would fix everything. You thought as long as she had food and medicine, that would be enough. But she needs more than that. She needs a father who is present. She needs a future that is not hiding in this apartment pretending she does not exist." "What future can I give her?" Veskhar asked, frustration bleeding into his own voice. "I cannot take her to Cathar Prime. The laws forbid hybrid citizenship. I cannot acknowledge her publicly without destroying my political position and possibly triggering a civil war. The best I can do is provide for her from a distance and hope that she survives long enough to make her own choices." "That is not good enough," Maya said flatly. "You are an emperor. You have power. Use it." "Power is not absolute," Veskhar said. "I rule by consent of the noble houses. If I push too hard, if I alienate too many of them, they will replace me. And whoever takes the throne after me will not be sending credits to Earth. They will be sending assassins." The words hung in the air between them, the ugly truth neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Maya's expression crumbled, and she turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. "So what do we do? Just wait until someone decides we are too much of a liability?" "No," Veskhar said. "We plan. We prepare. We find allies and build safeguards, and when the time is right, we change the laws. But that takes time, Maya. Years, possibly decades. I need you to be patient." "I do not have decades," Maya said. "I have right now. I have a 4-month-old baby who is going to start asking questions in a few years. What am I supposed to tell her? That her father is too busy running an empire to care about her?" "Tell her the truth," Veskhar said. "Tell her that her father is a coward who is trying to learn how to be brave." Before Maya could respond, a small sound came from the crib. A whimper, soft and uncertain. Both of them turned to look. Lyra was waking up, her eyes blinking open slowly. They were violet, just as Maya had said, the exact shade of Veskhar's own eyes. She stared up at the ceiling for a moment. Then her gaze drifted to the side, landing on Veskhar. The hatchling went very still. Veskhar froze as well, instinct taking over. This was the moment of first recognition, the moment when a Catharan hatchling identified its parent and imprinted their presence. It happened by scent and visual markers, the hatchling reading pheromones and scale patterns to determine who belonged to their family group. Lyra was only half Catharan, but apparently that half was enough. She watched him with intense focus, her violet eyes tracking every movement he made. Then, slowly, she lifted one tiny hand toward him, fingers splayed, reaching for something she recognized on a level deeper than conscious thought. Veskhar looked at Maya, who nodded. She wants you to hold her. I do not know how, Veskhar admitted. Catharan hatchlings are hardier. They do not require the same level of care. I might hurt her. You will not, Maya said. She is half Catharan, remember? She is tougher than she looks. Maya reached into the crib and lifted Lyra carefully, supporting her head the way human infants required. She turned and held the baby out to Veskhar, who took her with the kind of care he normally reserved for handling live explosives. Lyra was warm, warmer than he expected, and she weighed almost nothing. Her scales were soft under his claws, not yet hardened into armor. She made a small cooing sound and grabbed one of his fingers with surprising strength. Hello, Lyra, Veskhar said quietly. I am your father. The hatchling blinked at him, processing the information in whatever way infant minds processed such things. Then she smiled. It was not a particularly human smile, too wide and showing too many teeth that were already sharper than they should be. But it was a smile nonetheless, and it transformed her entire face. Something shifted in Veskhar's chest, a tectonic movement of emotion he had not felt in centuries. He had forgotten what it was like to care about something more than duty or ambition. He had forgotten what it was like to be vulnerable to something other than physical violence. But here, holding this tiny hybrid hatchling who smiled at him with his own eyes, he remembered. She likes you, Maya said softly. I was not sure she would. She usually cries when strangers hold her. I am not a stranger, Veskhar said. I am her father. She knows that. Do you? Maya asked. Know that, I mean. Do you really accept that she is your daughter? Veskhar looked down at Lyra, who had closed her eyes again, content to sleep in his arms. Yes, he said. I do. And I swear to you, Maya, I will protect her. Whatever it takes. Even if it costs me everything. Even your throne. Even my throne. Maya was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that matched her daughter's earlier focus. Then she nodded. Okay, I believe you. But believing is not enough. You need to prove it, not to me, to her. I will, Veskhar said. I do not know how yet, but I will. He stayed for 3 hours, holding Lyra, learning how to support her head and how to interpret her different cries. Maya taught him how to prepare the specialized formula, how to test the temperature, how to burp her afterward. It was humbling work, mundane and messy, so far removed from the grandeur of imperial rule that it felt like living in a different universe. But it was also the most important thing Veskhar had done in years. When he finally prepared to leave, Maya walked him to the door. Be careful, she said. If your council is watching you, they will notice you disappeared for half a day. I arranged cover, Veskhar assured her. As far as anyone knows, I spent the afternoon touring a military logistics facility. The officers there have been compensated for their discretion. Maya nodded, then hesitated. When will you come back? Soon, Veskhar said. I cannot promise when, but I will come back. And in the meantime, I am working on something. A plan to get you and Lyra somewhere safer. It will take time to arrange, but I am making progress. What kind of plan? You will see, Veskhar said. Trust me. I do, Maya said. I do not know why, but I do. Veskhar left the apartment and descended the stairs, his mind already working through the logistics of what he had just committed to. He had made a promise to protect Lyra, but promises meant nothing without action. He needed allies. He needed leverage. He needed a way to change the fundamental laws of the Empire without triggering the very civil war he was trying to prevent. It was an impossible task. But then again, so was winning a war against the Zrathi Collective. So was consolidating power in the face of entrenched noble opposition. So was ruling an empire that spanned a dozen star systems. Veskhar had built a career on accomplishing impossible tasks. This would just be one more. As he walked back through the darkening streets toward the spaceport, Veskhar felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not confidence, exactly. Not certainty. But something close to it. A sense of purpose that went beyond political survival or military victory. He had a daughter. And he was going to make sure she had a future worth living, even if it meant burning down everything he had built to give it to her. The assassination attempt came 2 months after Veskhar's visit to Earth. He survived because he had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that the palace guard who approached him in the Imperial Gardens was holding his ceremonial spear wrong. The angle was too aggressive, the grip too tight, the stance of someone preparing to strike rather than salute. Veskhar moved before conscious thought caught up. Twisting aside as the spear thrust forward, feeling the edge scrape across his side armor instead of punching through his chest. He caught the guard's arm, wrenched it backward until bones cracked, and slammed his attacker face first into the marble pathway, hard enough to shatter teeth. 2 more guards rushed him from the ornamental hedge line. Veskhar had been an emperor for 143 years, but before that, he had been a warrior, and warriors never forgot their training. He caught the first attacker's spear thrust, redirected it into the second attacker, then broke the first guard's neck with a single efficient twist. The second guard tried to pull the spear free from his own abdomen, blood bubbling between his claws. Veskhar ended him quickly, a claw strike to the throat that severed the major arteries. The Gardens fell silent, except for Veskhar's harsh breathing and the drip of blood on stone. He stood among 3 corpses in the place where emperors had walked in peace for 7,000 years and felt the cold weight of inevitability settle over him. This was not a random attack. Palace guards did not simply decide to murder the emperor on impulse. Someone had ordered this. Someone with enough authority to suborn members of the Imperial Guard. Someone who wanted him dead and thought 3 trained warriors would be sufficient to accomplish it. They had been wrong, but they would not make the same mistake twice. Veskhar activated his personal communicator, calling for his security chief. Commander Thrace arrived within minutes, accompanied by a full tactical squad. She was a veteran of the war, scarred and competent, one of the few people Veskhar trusted absolutely. She took in the scene with a single sweep of her eyes, her expression hardening. "Treachery," she said flatly. "Palace guards do not turn traitor without significant incentive. Someone paid them or threatened them or both. We need to lock down the palace immediately and begin interrogations." "No," Veskhar said. "If we lock down, whoever ordered this will know we are looking for them. They will cover their tracks or flee. I want them to think they still have the advantage. Your Radiance, with respect, you just survived an assassination attempt. We need to ensure your safety." "My safety is not the priority," Veskhar said. "Finding out who ordered this is. Run the bodies for identification. Check their financial records, their communications, their associations. Find the connection, but do it quietly. I want answers before anyone realizes we are asking questions." Thrace hesitated, then nodded. "As you command. But at least allow me to increase your personal security detail. If there was one attempt, there will be others." "Agreed," Veskhar said. "But make it subtle. I do not want to appear frightened or defensive. An emperor who hides behind guards looks weak, and weakness invites more attacks." The investigation took 3 days and confirmed what Veskhar already suspected. All 3 guards had received substantial payments into anonymous accounts in the weeks leading up to the attack. The money trail led through multiple shell corporations, but Thrace's specialists eventually traced it back to House Mandor. Lady Zareth had tried to kill him, or more precisely, she had hired others to do it for her, maintaining plausible deniability while eliminating the emperor who refused to marry her and grant her house control of the throne. It was a clever plan, and it would have worked if the assassins had been more skilled. but failure had its own consequences. Zareth had revealed her hand, shown her willingness to use violence to achieve political goals. That made her dangerous in a way the Council could not ignore. Veskhar could have her arrested, tried, executed. It would be perfectly legal and entirely justified. But it would also create a power vacuum that someone else would rush to fill, and it would not address the deeper problem. The noble houses were restless. They wanted a clear succession. They wanted stability and certainty, and a future they could plan around. And as long as Veskhar remained without an acknowledged heir, they would continue to maneuver against him. He was contemplating these problems in his private study when his communicator chimed with Maya's emergency code. Veskhar answered immediately, his heart's accelerating. What is wrong? Maya's face appeared on the holographic display, and Veskhar knew instantly that something terrible had happened. Her eyes were red from crying, her face pale with terror. They came to the apartment, she said, her voice shaking. 2 Catharans in civilian clothes. They said they were from the embassy, that they had questions about Lyra. I did not let them in, but they took pictures through the window. They saw her. They know about her. Veskhar's blood went cold. When did this happen? 20 minutes ago. I waited until they left. Then I grabbed Lyra and ran. We are in a public transit station right now. I do not know where to go. I do not know what to do. Stay where you are, Veskhar said, his mind already calculating options. I am sending someone to get you. A human. Someone who will not draw attention. Her name is Maya Chen. She is a former intelligence operative who works for me. She will bring you to a safe location. Do not trust anyone else, do you understand? No one. Veskhar, Maya said, her voice breaking. They found us. How did they find us? I do not know, Veskhar admitted. But I will find out, and I will make sure they regret it. He terminated the call and immediately contacted Maya Chen, one of his network of civilian operatives on Earth. She was reliable and discreet, a former military intelligence officer who had provided information during the war and continued to work for him afterward. He gave her Maya's location and instructions to bring her and Lyra to a secure apartment he maintained under a false identity. Then he contacted Thrace. I need a ship prepared, he said. Immediately. Not an Imperial vessel. Something small and fast that cannot be traced back to me. And I need a security team I can trust absolutely. People who will follow my orders even if those orders conflict with Council interests. Thrace did not ask questions. She simply nodded and began making arrangements. Within 2 hours, Veskhar was boarding an unmarked courier ship with 6 hand-picked operatives. The flight to Earth took 14 hours at maximum acceleration. Veskhar spent that time reviewing intelligence reports and planning his next moves. Someone in the Imperial government had discovered Lyra's existence and sent agents to confirm it. That someone was almost certainly connected to Lady Zareth and House Mandor. The assassination attempt had failed, so now they were trying a different approach. Expose the scandal. Force Veskhar to either acknowledge the hybrid hatchling publicly, which would destroy his political position, or disavow her, which would make him look weak and dishonorable. Either way, they won. Unless Veskhar changed the rules of the game. The ship landed at the same private spaceport Veskhar had used before. He left the security team with the ship and traveled alone to the safe house, a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood far from Maya's original location. Maya Chen met him at the door, her expression professionally neutral. They are inside, she said quietly. The woman is frightened but holding together. The child is asleep. No one followed us from the transit station. I made sure of it. Good, Veskhar said. Thank you, Sarah. Wait outside. I need to speak with them privately. Sarah nodded and withdrew. Veskhar entered the apartment and found Maya sitting on the couch, holding Lyra against her chest. The hatchling was indeed sleeping, but Maya looked like she had not slept in days. When she saw Veskhar, something in her face crumbled. I am sorry, she said. I was careful, I never told anyone. I do not know how they found out. It is not your fault, Veskhar said, sitting down beside her. My enemies were watching me, not you. They flagged the financial transfers and started investigating. Eventually, they found the connection. I should have anticipated this. I should have taken better precautions. What do we do now? Maya asked. We cannot stay here forever. And even if we could, Lyra deserves better than hiding in safe houses her whole life. Veskhar looked at his daughter, at the way her scales caught the light even in sleep, at the tiny claws that flexed against Maya's shirt. She was 6 months old now, growing rapidly, becoming more aware of her surroundings. Soon she would start asking questions. Soon she would want to know why she looked different from other children, why her mother never talked about her father, why they had to move and hide and pretend to be something they were not. I have been thinking about this, Veskhar said slowly, about what kind of future I can give her, and I have realized that there is only one way forward. I have to change the law. I have to make it legal for hybrids to exist within the Empire, and I have to do it in a way that does not trigger a civil war. That sounds impossible, Maya said. It is, Veskhar agreed, which is why I am going to need help, not just from my allies on the council, but from humans as well. Your people proved during the war that you are capable of extraordinary things when properly motivated. I need to harness that capability. I need to create a coalition. Humans and Catherines working together, strong enough to force the noble houses to accept change. You are talking about a political revolution, Maya said. I am talking about survival, Veskhar corrected. Mine, yours, and Lyra's. The old order is dying. The war proved that. The noble houses cling to traditions that no longer serve the Empire. They speak of genetic purity while our population declines and our territories shrink. They refuse to adapt, and empires that refuse to adapt do not last. I can either wait for the Empire to collapse under its own stagnation, or I can force it to evolve. And if I am going to force evolution, I might as well ensure it benefits my daughter. How? Maya asked. How do you force an entire empire to change its fundamental beliefs? The same way you win any war, Veskhar said. You identify your objective, you marshal your resources, and you attack the enemy's weakest point. The Council's weakness is that they depend on public support to maintain their power. If I can shift public opinion, if I can make the population see hybrids as assets rather than abominations, the Council will have to follow. They will have no choice. And how do you shift public opinion? You tell a story, Veskhar said. A compelling story that people want to believe. You show them a hatchling with golden scales and violet eyes, a child who represents the future rather than the past. You make them see her as I see her, as someone worth protecting. Maya was quiet for a long time, her hand stroking Lyra's back in a rhythmic pattern. That is a dangerous story to tell. If it fails, if the people reject her, she will spend her whole life being hated for something she did not choose. I know, Veskhar said, which is why I am not going to tell the story until I am certain it will succeed. I am going to spend the next several years building support, creating infrastructure, changing laws incrementally. And when the moment is right, when I have enough allies and enough public goodwill, I will acknowledge Lyra publicly. I will present her to the Empire not as a scandal, but as proof that Catharans and humans can build a future together. And if someone tries to kill her before you can do all that, then I will kill them first, Veskhar said simply. Anyone who threatens my daughter will face the full weight of the Imperial military. I have not spent a century building this empire just to watch it devoured by small-minded fools who cannot see past their own prejudices. Maya met his eyes, searching for something. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. Okay, I trust you. But Veskhar, if you are going to do this, you need to be all in. No more half measures. No more hiding and pretending she does not exist. If you are going to be her father, really be her father. Be present in her life. Teach her, protect her, love her. Can you do that? Veskhar looked at Lyra, at his daughter who slept peacefully, unaware of the forces that swirled around her existence. He thought about his own father, dead for 3 centuries, a cold and distant figure who had viewed heirs as political assets rather than children. He thought about the kind of parent he wanted to be, the kind of parent Lyra deserved. Yes, he said, I can do that. And I will. Maya smiled, tired but genuine. Then we have a chance. We have more than a chance, Veskhar said. "We have a plan, and I have never lost when I had a plan." Outside the apartment, in the streets of a world that was not his home, in a city that would never fully accept him, Veskhar made a choice. He chose his daughter over his empire. He chose love over duty. He chose a future that did not yet exist over a past that was already dead. And in making that choice, he became something he had never been before. Not an emperor, not a warrior, but a father. And that, he realized, was the most important role he would ever play. 3 years passed like the turning of seasons, measured not in imperial calendars, but in the milestones of a hatchling growing into a child. Lyra's first words, spoken in a mix of human English and Catharan dialect that made no linguistic sense but delighted both her parents. Her first steps, taken on legs that were stronger than human children but still wobbly with inexperience. Her first question about why her scales were different colors than the other Catharan children she saw in the educational videos Veskhar had carefully curated for her. Her first nightmare about monsters that wanted to hurt her, and the first time she asked her father if he would always protect her. Veskhar had answered yes, and he had spent 3 years making sure that yes would mean something. The work had been slow and frustrating and frequently dangerous. Veskhar had started by identifying allies within the Imperial Council, nobles who were pragmatic enough to see that the Empire needed to evolve or die. There were fewer than he hoped, but more than he feared. He cultivated them carefully, offering political favors and strategic advantages in exchange for their support on seemingly unrelated issues. Infrastructure reform, educational expansion, trade agreements with human worlds. Each small victory built momentum, shifted the balance of power incrementally toward progressive factions. Simultaneously, he worked to undermine his enemies. Lady Zareth had been the first target. Veskhar had gathered evidence of her assassination attempt and presented it to the council in a closed session. The proof was undeniable, and the penalty was severe. Zareth was stripped of her title and exiled to a remote colony world where she would spend the rest of her life in obscurity. House Mandor fell into disarray without her leadership, and Veskhar installed one of his allies as the new house head. It sent a message to the other noble houses: cross the Emperor and face annihilation. But intimidation alone would not change hearts and minds. For that, Veskhar needed a different approach. He needed to make humans visible within the Empire, not as servants or auxiliaries, but as partners. He began by expanding the human presence in imperial institutions. Human scholars were invited to teach at Catharan universities. Human engineers were contracted to work on major infrastructure projects. Human diplomats were given positions within the foreign service. Each appointment was carefully chosen, individuals who would represent their species well, who would demonstrate competence and value. The resistance was immediate and vocal. Conservative nobles decried the contamination of Catharan institutions. Purity advocates staged protests outside the imperial palace. But Veskhar pushed forward relentlessly, using every tool at his disposal: executive orders, economic incentives, strategic media campaigns highlighting human contributions during the war. Slowly, grudgingly, public opinion began to shift. Not among everyone, but among enough people to matter. And through it all, Veskhar traveled to Earth as often as his schedule permitted. Sometimes once a month, sometimes less frequently when political crises demanded his attention. But he always came back. He watched Lyra grow from an infant into a toddler, then into a bright and curious child who asked questions faster than he could answer them. He taught her Catharan history and human literature. He showed her maps of the Empire and explained how governments worked. He trained her in basic self-defense, adapting Catharan combat techniques to account for her smaller size and hybrid physiology. Maya documented everything, recording videos and taking photographs, building an archive of a father and daughter who existed in the spaces between worlds. She had quit 2 of her 3 jobs, using the generous financial support Veskhar provided to focus on Lyra's education and well-being. The cramped apartment had been replaced by a comfortable house in a safe neighborhood, with a yard where Lyra could play and a study where Maya could work on the advocacy projects she had begun. She had become a voice for hybrid rights on Earth, speaking at universities and conferences, connecting with other families who faced similar challenges. She was careful never to mention Veskhar by name, but her passion and eloquence made her influential in ways that extended far beyond her personal situation. Lyra, meanwhile, had become the center of both their worlds. She was brilliant, absorbing information with a voracious appetite that reminded Veskhar of his own youth. She was also kind, showing empathy and compassion that he suspected came from Maya's influence. She loved stories, especially ones about underdogs who triumphed against impossible odds. She loved music, particularly the haunting melodies of Catharan ceremonial songs. And she loved her parents, with an uncomplicated devotion that made Veskhar's hearts ache every time she smiled at him. She also loved asking difficult questions, like the one she asked on the eve of her 3rd birthday, sitting in Veskhar's lap while he read her a story about ancient Catharan warriors. "Papa," Lyra said, using the human word she had chosen for him, "why do I not have a last name like other kids?" Veskhar closed the book carefully, buying himself time to formulate an answer. "You do have a last name, Chen, like your mother, but that is Mama's name," Lyra said, with the relentless logic of a 3-year-old. "What is your name? Do I get your name too?" Veskhar glanced at Maya, who sat across the room watching with an expression that said, "This is your problem to solve." He looked back at Lyra, at her violet eyes and golden scales and the expectant expression that demanded truth, not evasion. "My family name is Torvash," Veskhar said quietly. "It is a very old name, one that has been passed down through many generations. And yes, Lyra, you have that name too. You are Lyra Chen Torvash. You carry both your mother's heritage and mine." Lyra considered this seriously. "Can I use it? The Torvash part?" "Someday," Veskhar said. "When you are older, when the world is ready to know who you are, you will use that name. And everyone will see that you are my daughter, and they will treat you with the respect you deserve." "When will that be?" Lyra asked. "When will the world be ready?" "Soon," Veskhar promised. "Very soon." He had not been lying. The moment was approaching, the culmination of 3 years of careful planning. Veskhar had scheduled a major address to the Imperial Council and the Catharan public, ostensibly to discuss post-war reconstruction efforts. But the real purpose was something far more significant. He was going to announce a comprehensive reform package that included, among other provisions, the repeal of laws prohibiting hybrid citizenship. And then, in front of the entire empire, he was going to introduce his daughter. It was a calculated risk. Veskhar had spent months gaming out the possible responses, running simulations, consulting with allies. The consensus was that he had perhaps a 60% chance of success. 60% chance that the reforms would pass, that the public would accept Lyra, that the empire would move forward rather than fracture. 40% chance of civil war, assassination, or political collapse. Those were not good odds, but they were the best odds he was going to get, and he was out of time. Lyra was growing up. She would start asking harder questions soon, questions he could not answer with vague promises about someday. She deserved better. She deserved a future where she did not have to hide. The morning of the address, Veskhar woke early in the Earth house where he had spent the night. Maya was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. She looked up when he entered, her expression tight with barely controlled fear. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "There is still time to back out. We could wait longer, build more support." "We have waited long enough," Veskhar said, "and we have all the support we are going to get." "It is time, Maya." She nodded slowly. "Lyra does not understand what is happening today. She thinks we are just going to see your work. She is excited." "Good," Veskhar said. "Let her be excited. Children should not have to carry the weight of their parents' choices." "But she will," Maya said. "Whether we want her to or not, she will carry this. If it goes wrong, if the people reject her, she will spend her whole life knowing she was the reason an empire tore itself apart. And if it goes right," Veskhar said, sitting down across from her, "she will spend her whole life knowing she was the reason an empire learned to be better. That is worth the risk." Maya met his eyes, and Veskhar saw the same determination that had sustained her through 3 years of single parenthood before he had stepped up. That is easy for you to say. You are not the one who has to watch her face if they call her an abomination. Yes, I am, Veskhar said quietly. I am her father. I will be standing right beside her when it happens. And if anyone dares to call my daughter an abomination, I will make them regret every breath they have ever taken. Maya's expression softened slightly. You have changed. 3 years ago, you would have just sent credits and hoped the problem solved itself. Now you sound like an actual parent. 3 years ago, I was a coward, Veskhar said. Now I am just terrified. But I have learned that being a father means doing the right thing even when you are terrified. Especially when you are terrified. They prepared Lyra carefully, dressing her in a beautiful gown that Maya had commissioned, green silk embroidered with gold thread in patterns that complemented her scales rather than hiding them. The child was delighted with the outfit, spinning in circles to make the skirt flare out. She did not understand the significance of the day, but she understood that something important was happening, and she was determined to be on her best behavior. The journey to Cathar Prime took 8 hours by fast courier. Lyra slept for most of it, exhausted by her own excitement. Veskhar held her while she slept, memorizing the weight of her in his arms, the warmth of her scales against his chest. Maya sat beside him, her hand clasped in his free hand, both of them silent with anticipation. When they arrived at the Imperial Palace, Veskhar's security team was waiting. Commander Thrace took one look at Maya and Lyra and nodded, her expression carefully neutral. The council chamber is prepared. Your Radiance. Media feeds are active. Attendance is at 98%, higher than any session in the last decade. Everyone wants to see what you are going to announce. They are about to find out, Veskhar said. Are the protection protocols in place? Yes, Thrace said. If anyone makes a move toward your family, they will be neutralized immediately. I have snipers positioned at every angle, and your security detail is prepared to extract you at the first sign of trouble. Good, Veskhar said. But it will not come to that. Today we are making history, not violence. He led Maya and Lyra through the palace corridors, past tapestries depicting 7,000 years of imperial rule, past statues of emperors who had conquered worlds and built dynasties. Lyra stared at everything with wide eyes, asking questions in a rapid whisper that Veskhar answered patiently. She was not afraid. She trusted him completely, believed that her father would keep her safe no matter what happened. That trust was the most precious thing Veskhar had ever been given, and he would die before he betrayed it. They reached the entrance to the council chamber. Veskhar could hear the murmur of voices inside. Hundreds of nobles and dignitaries gathered to witness whatever announcement the emperor had deemed important enough to summon them. He knelt down in front of Lyra, bringing himself to her eye level. Listen to me, little one, he said softly. When we go inside, there will be many people watching us. Some of them will be happy to see you. Some of them will not. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, I need you to remember something. You are my daughter. You are Lyra Chen Torvash, and you are perfect exactly as you are. Do you understand? Lyra nodded solemnly. I understand, Papa. I am perfect exactly as I am. Good girl, Veskhar said. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it without hesitation, her small claws gripping his fingers with complete trust. Together with Maya on his other side, they walked into the council chamber. The room fell silent as they entered. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to confusion to dawning shock as they registered what they were seeing. A human woman and a hybrid child, walking beside the emperor as if they belonged there, as if they had every right to stand in the most sacred space of Catharan government. Veskhar walked to the center of the chamber, to the raised platform where emperors had addressed the council for 7 millennia. He did not release Lyra's hand. He looked out at the assembled nobles, at High Chancellor Dracov, whose face had gone gray with fury, at Lady Syrinx of House Kelmar, whose eyes were wide with something that might have been hope, at Commander General Thrace, who stood at attention with her hand on her weapon, ready to defend her emperor's family. "Members of the council," Veskhar said, his voice carrying through the chamber with the authority of absolute power. "Honored guests, I have summoned you here today to witness a moment that will define the future of our empire. For too long, we have clung to traditions that no longer serve us. For too long, we have measured worth by purity of blood rather than strength of character. For too long, we have denied ourselves the potential of cooperation and growth because we were afraid of change." He paused, letting the words settle. "The war taught us many things. It taught us that we are not invincible. It taught us that we need allies, not servants. It taught us that survival requires adaptation, not stagnation. And it taught me, personally, that the most important duty of any leader is not to preserve the past, but to create a better future." Veskhar lifted Lyra into his arms, holding her so everyone in the chamber could see her clearly. "This is my daughter," he said, "Maya Chen Torvash. She is 3 years old. She is half Catharan and half human, and she is the future of this empire." The chamber erupted, voices shouting in protest and support, nobles rising from their seats, some in anger and some in acclamation. Drakov was screaming something about betrayal and genetic pollution. Lady Syrinx was applauding, tears streaming down her scaled face. Commander Thrace had drawn her weapon, scanning for threats. And through it all, Lyra clung to Veskhar's neck, frightened by the noise but trusting her father to protect her. "Silence," Veskhar commanded, and the force of his voice cut through the chaos. The chamber quieted, though tension still crackled in the air like a live current. "I am not asking for your approval. I am not requesting permission. I am informing you of a fact. This child exists. She is mine. And I am changing the law to ensure that she and every other hybrid in this empire receives full citizenship and all the rights that come with it." "You cannot do this," Drakov said, his voice shaking with rage. "The council will never ratify such a law. The people will never accept it. You are destroying everything our ancestors built." "Our ancestors built an empire," Veskhar said coldly. "I am ensuring that empire survives, and if the council refuses to ratify this law, I will dissolve the council and rule by executive decree. If the people refuse to accept it, I will spend the next century changing their minds. I have that time. Do you?" "But the bloodline," Drakov protested weakly. "The purity. The bloodline ends with me if I have no heir," Veskhar said. "Lyra is my heir. She is the only heir I will ever acknowledge. So the council has a choice. Accept her and the reforms that come with her, or watch the dynasty collapse and plunge the empire into a succession war that will make the Zrathi conflict look like a border skirmish." He let that sink in, watching calculations flash across noble faces. They were weighing options, measuring risks, deciding where their loyalty truly lay. Some would support him, some would oppose him. Some would wait to see which way the wind blew before committing, but they would all have to choose. Lady Syrinx rose from her seat, her voice clear and strong. "House Kelmar recognizes Maya Chen Torvash as heir to the imperial throne. We support the citizenship reforms and pledge our resources to their implementation." One by one, other nobles stood. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but they stood. House Torath, House Velkor, House Shinar. More than half the council within minutes. Not universal support, but enough. Enough to pass the reforms, enough to create legitimacy, enough to make this real. Drakov remained seated, his face twisted with impotent fury. He looked at Veskhar with undisguised hatred, and Veskhar looked back with the cold certainty of victory. The High Chancellor had lost, and they both knew it. "This is not over," Drakov said quietly. "There will be consequences, resistance, perhaps violence." "There is always resistance to change," Veskhar said, "and I am prepared to meet it with whatever force is necessary. But change is coming, Chancellor. The only question is whether you will be part of building the new empire or part of the ruins of the old one." He turned away from Drakov, dismissing him as the irrelevance he had become. He looked at Maya, who was crying silently, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. He looked at Lyra, who was still frightened by the noise but beginning to understand that something important had occurred, that she was at the center of it. "You are free," Veskhar told his daughter, speaking loud enough for the entire chamber to hear. "You are acknowledged. You are my heir, and you are a citizen of the Catharan Empire with all the rights and privileges that entails. No one can take that away from you. No one can tell you that you do not belong. You are Maya Chen, daughter of Veskhar, and you are exactly what this empire needs." Lyra looked up at him with her violet eyes, so much like his own, and smiled. Her fear had evaporated, replaced by the simple joy of a child who knew she was loved and protected. "I am perfect exactly as I am," she said, repeating the words he had told her earlier. "Yes," Veskhar said, his voice breaking slightly. "You are perfect exactly as you are." The chamber erupted again, but this time the sound was different. Not anger or protest, but something else. Discussion, debate. The sound of a political structure creaking as it shifted to accommodate new reality. Change was messy and painful, and never as clean as anyone wanted. But it was also necessary and inevitable, and ultimately transformative. Veskhar descended from the platform, still carrying Lyra, with Maya at his side. Commander Thrace fell in beside them, her security team forming a protective cordon. They walked out of the council chamber together, a hybrid family at the center of an empire that was learning to embrace complexity rather than fear it. Outside, the Catharan sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Veskhar carried his daughter to the palace observation deck, the same place where he had stood 3 years ago, contemplating reconstruction and succession and the weight of duty. Maya joined them, and for a long moment they simply stood together, watching the light fade over the capital city. "What happens now?" Maya asked softly. "Now we do the hard part," Veskhar said. "We implement the reforms. We change minds and hearts. We build the infrastructure to support hybrid families. We create educational programs and social services. We fight every battle necessary to ensure that Lyra grows up in an empire that values her for who she is rather than what she represents." "That sounds exhausting," Maya said. "It will be," Veskhar agreed. "But we will do it together, all 3 of us. And eventually, Lyra will do it herself. She will be empress someday. And when she rules, no child will have to hide because of who their parents are. No one will have to choose between their heritage and their home. She will create that future. We are just laying the foundation." Lyra had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted by the day's events. Veskhar held her carefully, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her small body against his chest. She was so young, so vulnerable, and yet also so strong. She had inherited her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. She would face challenges and hardships, prejudice and hate, but she would overcome them because she was Maya Chen, because she was perfect exactly as she was, and because she had parents who would fight the entire galaxy to ensure she had the future she deserved. 8 months after the war, an alien emperor had received a call that changed his life. 3 years later, that same emperor had changed his empire. Not through conquest or violence, but through the simple revolutionary act of loving his daughter enough to demand the world accept her. It was not the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. The war was finally over. And a new future, messy and complicated and full of hope, had just begun.